The Curies. The Curies. Madame Curie and Pierre Curie and basically the Curie family in general. Women weren't allowed to practice science back then in that day. And they couldn't post papers to science as women. So they had to have a token man basically post papers under their name. And they were having Pierre Curie's boyfriend or husband was actually the first male secretary. Was not actually a scientist himself, in fact. In fact, he just took notes for Madame Curie and Pierre Curie, the different husbands, basically. But because they're working so closely with them, they had to get married to their secretary, to their male secretaries, basically, in order just to post or work with, or say that they had anything to do with. But it was actually the women that were actually leading scientists back in that day. And I actually had to order or pay for a building to be built under their for them, just for them, so they could work in secret, actually at a secret building known as, I believe you call it, the Hall. And this was actually a building for just women to be working, but they needed token men, because in order for them to be considered serious scientists, in order for them to post scientific papers or to get their papers or their information or their work out there, they had to post under male names, or male, basically. So they married their secretaries, basically, and posted it as their husband's work, even though that they were working so closely together. Plus, people started to wonder, why are you always around this guy? What is going on with you always around this guy? So they said at first that it was their secretary. That they were secretaries for the men, but it was actually the women that were actually leading the men down the road. And it was actually the men that were actually being secretaries for the women. Pierre Curie's electrolysis machine or whatever. Pierre Curie wasn't really a scientist himself. He was nothing more than a male secretary. And this, of course, back in the day would have ruffled a lot of feathers. In fact, men would not let women post or be scientists themselves. So the reason why they had to get married and stuff, and why Madame Curie was working so much with Pierre Curie's electrolysis machine, it was actually her machine. She invented it. She was a genius, a female genius. And she did do some work. The original Curie, if you go way back, the original Curie, or one of the Curies, was I guess maybe I kind of shifted time a little bit as the way it kind of moved, because I started doing this female rights thing, where I was trying to get women to post papers. So I guess maybe I adjusted time just a tidbit. But anyway, though, it kind of moved a little bit, because once I got a little bit more powerful, a little bit more this or that, I was able to basically, move it a little bit more, where women stopped being secretaries. But that's right, I forgot about my whole female rights movement. I actually started doing this female rights movement at one point, where women could not post papers for some reason. I was like, what do you mean you can't post papers as a scientist? They're like, no, they won't let us be a scientist at all. I was like, what? Why won't they let you be a scientist? I was like, all right, okay. Find a guy, say you're working for him, and then post under his name. But like I said, they started getting in trouble because people started, gossiping and stuff, because they were always around these people. And they said at first that they were working for secretaries, but they were always around these people. And they went to work with these people, and they were wondering, why are you going into this building alone with this person or with this group of people? And what are you always doing inside that building, known as the Hall? And so there was a lot of talk. What are they doing? They must be doing something bad, or they thought sex or something. I don't know, mass orgies or something like that is what they thought. So I was like, okay, well, all right, get married. So Pierre Curie's electrolysis machine was actually what's her name, Curie, was actually the woman that it was the other way around. The woman was actually the men were actually being the secretaries for the females, but everyone thought back then that it was actually the females being the secretaries for the men. And they had to go into this little building known, I believe it was called the Hall, which I ordered to be built, to do science in secret, behind closed doors. But they were basically, it was the women actually leading the men, but no one knew that, and everyone thought it was the other way around. Or that, great men were going into that building to do science. But it was actually the women, the great women going into that building to do science, and the men were just writing things down. Plus, it made it easier for them to post papers because the men would just write it down and say it was his work, you know, as a secretary. So it was actually the women, but nobody knew that at the time until I told them. So anyway, so Pierre Curie was really just a secretary and really did not. I mean, he learned quite a bit from Madame Curie. I mean, eventually, I do believe he became a scientist of his own right later on down the road, towards the end, because he spent so much time around this genius woman, or one of the genius women, and I think he did do some stuff on his own, but mostly it was her posting as him, because I believe back then the scientists wouldn't let a woman, because women didn't win Nobel Prizes back then. Women didn't ever do anything. I mean, people thought that women didn't do anything other than take notes. I think Pierre Curie did have some stuff that was actually him, but the vast majority, and I think they straightened out, maybe that was his electrolysis machine, I don't know, but the vast majority of the work was actually the females in that building doing all the work, and I think I posted that and people found out about it. So they kind of straightened out a little bit. So maybe it's a little straighter now, but originally it was thought that they were nothing more than secretaries. It was the men all doing everything. But in those walls, and the building actually even had to be built as a male-only building or something like that. And I forget what it was originally called. It was originally considered like a hayloft or something like that. It was considered something that wasn't scientific, but it was actually being scientific. And they, excuse the background, somebody's actually purposely trying to make noise right now to disturb my video. And they, see what I mean? You know, when you're making a famous video, they just gotta weigh in on it somehow, right? A little voice in the background. I guess that happens to all great people. Anyway, so the, her name is Rosalie Briley, by the way, if you must know. So basically the females were doing the great work in that building, and the building had to be built as a male building, and it was originally called a hayloft, and then it was called something else, and they had to they actually were making fake things as well, but they were actually doing science in like, I think it was 1/3 was actually a fake thing. Like part of the building had to be like a fake thing, and then the rest of the building, 2/3 of the building, had to be the real science building of it, and they were doing science in secret, and they were making some sort of a little stupid thing on the side, like hayloft or something, and they also had a team of guys working around there too, I believe, that were doing the fake thing. That was actually a legitimate business, I think, on its own right, but it wasn't really what they were really doing in the building. It was a secret science building, actually, and the Curies were heading it up, and there's problems with the payroll because it was actually Curie's money, but and that's why they had to get married, I think, because she couldn't pay the workers herself, and there was a problem with that, so they had to get married so she could pay the workers, basically, you know, and just be like, I'm married to him, you know, blah blah blah, so they could continue the work. I think there was a little bit of a separation there for a little bit between the guy and the girl, because she was upset because he was taking all the credit and everything, and there's some little problem with that. But the Curies was my major female thing, and I actually included schools were built for that, for just women that were actually, you know, there's all kinds of stuff that happened with the Curies. I remember, because I kind of like used them to do some other things, like basically change the way people looked at women, pretty much. And I think they've straightened it out now, but basically, yeah. As a child, I was like, okay, well, you're gonna be working. You're gonna say you're gonna work for a man, but you're actually gonna be the scientist. And yeah, she one of the Curies. I think it started out as just a Secretary Curie, though. There was just a Secretary Curie, and she spent so much time around that, you know, she became enlightened herself or something, and then I just was like, oh, okay, well, since I'm working with you, let's go ahead and just start doing this other stuff too. So I was like, okay, and then we'll just start this whole women's movement, basically, because she was like, you know, I wanted them to get credit too, and then I was like, okay, well, why don't we just do it equal credit or something like that, you know, or something, because towards the end there, I think the guy did actually do a few things himself or something like that, but the vast majority of the research, that's why it says Madame Curie was working at, what's his name's, or the Curie, the female, was working with the guy's machine a lot. He was actually her machine because she built it and she knows it best. I think he was he was basically like a helper pretty much, and he would build the stuff for her, and she would tell him how to build it basically, and tell him basically, and he was basically assisting her with the building of stuff, and she was actually doing the work herself on the machines herself, that she had designed, but he had built. So I guess in that way it was his machine, but she was the genius behind it, I believe. And it was my female rights movement, basically, and so yeah, that's why it says she was working at his machine. He built it, but she admitted it. So yeah, and she knew all the physics behind everything. She understood everything. And that was one of the interesting things is where the guys were assisting the women, but nobody could accept that. So she had to post papers under his name and say that it was his work when it was really her work, and basically all that because I believe back then females weren't considered, or I don't know, they just didn't think women could be that smart or something like that. It was like a big women's rights movement. And eventually there were schools that were considered, they were supposed to be for both because they wouldn't allow an only women's school, but they were actually only women's school or something. There was a lot of, it was a lot of changing. Like I was like using them to go, "Ah!" Basically I had the money and the power as a child to basically be able to be like, okay, do this, and basically I was using my STEAM empire to basically bring the focus around to women a little bit more, and because I was a child, so I didn't understand or care about who was who. I was innocent. I was a child, so, and I wasn't I didn't have any personal bias myself, so I was like, even with black people, I'm not really biased myself as far as. It's kind of annoying when they're sleeping with my girlfriend and like purposely trying to screw with my life. That's a little annoying, yes, and that gives me a little bit of bias. But in general, as far as a black person, there are black people that I've seen on TV and stuff, and they actually do great things, and I'm like, those are great people or wonderful people. But as far as personal bias, just for color, like, no, I'm not biased at all. And so, there was a biased world. And so I had to find ways of getting the women, or making situations where so the hall was actually like a secret building where secret females were doing secret science. They're basically pursuing their love of science, and I was helping them in that way. As a child, I was like, okay, I'm rich and I'm a child. Construct a building. We're going to call it a man's building, but it's going to be for women. And that was done. And that was the Curie story. And yeah, I was a mega rich child. Inventor of steam, and steam trains, and steam shovels. And so I could order stuff. So I did. And Madame Curie, just a lot of little things that I was just like, as a child, I was like, I can do this, so I am. But yeah, Madame Curie, yes! One of my greatest, yes, I forgot about that. One of my greatest triumphs. I was like, I was a child, I was like working with them, and I was like, okay, let's do this. I was like, I don't care. I'm that rich and I'm that powerful. We're going to say this, but we're going to be doing that. And yeah. As a child, as a genius child inventor, I could order just about anything I wanted. So, but yeah, I did a lot of great things. A lot of great things as a child. Ordered a lot of great things. It was my money, so I could do whatever I wanted with it. And I did.